principles of flow guide us towards better management of operations, especially manufacturing operations. When work is properly scheduled to get the maximum uninterrupted performance at the most constrained resources, and when material release is controlled and properly buffered to sustain that performance without building unneeded queues of work at the less constrained resources, a factory will achieve optimal overall performance. Throughput will be maximized, work in process and finished goods inventory will be minimized, and the level of operating expense needed to support these positions will be the lowest. When I say they have been prioritized, it is said in this line that if you look after the most important things, the operating expense required to sustain this level of operation will be the minimum. Mind you, it has not mentioned that please look after the costs and go after reducing costs. The priority of focusing on cost is way low down there. In fact, it says that if you have looked at all other aspects of manufacturing, the cost will be the least possible. The reason why it is called the principles of operation management, or in other words, principles of flow, is because it has been proven over and over again that the focus on costs does not directly translate into your bottom line. However, we try to put a cost figure on all our improvements. So, if we sum up all the improvements, that should add up to my bottom line, but it never does. Coming back to this guiding principle, it also hints us that all manufacturing operations should have the ability to perform certain functions. The first sentence is properly scheduled. That means we should know how to schedule. Then it says you should know how to avoid building up queues of work at less constrained resources. Now, what do you mean by less constrained resources and more constrained resources? That means the resources which have more capacity, that means they can produce more but are producing less, are called less constrained. So we have to separate the more constrained from the less constrained. What is going to do this and why do we need this? Because if we don't focus on the constraint, we will not be able to focus on flow. But if we allow the not constrained impact the performance of the constraint, again we are disrupting flow. So we need to separate the constraint from the unconstrained. Then it says that WIP or finished goods will be minimized. It also says unneeded queues. That means please do not do anything which is going to build up queues. That means please do not release more than possible. Possible, that means the possibility of it being manufactured, or the capability of the constrained resource decides what are you going to release. And then it says that throughput will be maximized. Throughput means money earned by the company through sales. So if you produce something before time and it doesn't get dispatched, it's waste. Let's come back to this word called properly scheduled. Scheduling is a process well documented by the American Production and Inventory Control Society, and this was done way back in 1960s. In fact, the steps to production scheduling have always been in place. By the arrival of computers, they got automated, and the amount of resources required to production schedule were dramatically reduced. What 30 people sat and did is now being done by one computer. This makes production scheduling a very apt tool for everyone to use. But just imagine, it was such an important thing that 30 people sat together and scheduled the operations of a company. Today, the same advantage can be gained by most of the people by using the same steps on your desktop and use the scheduling practice and tool to better coordinate and manage the whole operations. Production scheduling is that practice which actually links all the departments of a manufacturing organization. When I say all departments, basically all the major departments which contribute to manufacturing. That would be the marketing department or the sales department which gets in the orders, the production department which utilizes all the resources that a company has invested in to convert raw material into finished goods that can be sold, and the purchasing department which actually purchases the material. Stores is an intermediary step. They just organize and lay it out and store it and keep stock. Now, by using production scheduling, one can actually coordinate and synchronize all these operations. Let me go down deep into scheduling. Scheduling is actually a part of the planning process. Planning process is a term very loosely used, and I've come to understand that very few companies have been able to use planning to their advantage. Yes, they have used the word called plan and blamed most of the failures on planning department, but never has a company I have seen used planning to maximize their profits. Planning, if you look at the whole horizon of planning, that means from tomorrow to way into the future, 4 years, 5 years into the future, this whole planning horizon is divided into 3 major parts. Any plan that focuses the company resources on looking at what the company will be doing beyond 2 years is called strategic plan. Any plan that focuses on the time span of more than 3 months and less than 2 months is called tactical planning. Here, most of the times you are adjusting to the small deviations in market information and helping the company book more sales. That part of the planning process that looks at the use of company resources and integration from now to the next 3 months is called scheduling. And in our knowledge, production scheduling. The reason why we are looking at 3 months is I suspect that there will be a few materials used by manufacturing companies which have 3-month lead time. So basically, you can have a planning schedule for 1 month too, and that is also a planned schedule. But the biggest identifier of a schedule from a plan is that a schedule has a very precise time and date on it. So when you say that you have scheduled an operation, you will always say 3 things. 1, the item that needs to be produced, the quantity in which it needs to be produced, and the time it will take. That means the beginning and the end of the operation. So scheduling starts putting time and precise time on the whole plan. One does have a plan of visiting the relatives, and you say, yes, I have a plan of visiting around Diwali. But when you send your arrival time of the train or the aircraft, are you actually scheduling your arrival? And then everything gets coordinated because of that schedule. It is the same thing that happens in production. It is the scheduling process which actually tells the whole company how and what to align to. Now, scheduling, as I mentioned earlier, was a process sort of acknowledged and documented way back in 60s. There are various kinds of scheduling. It could be forward scheduling, it could be backward scheduling. Then it could be finite capacity scheduling, it could be infinite capacity scheduling. Finite capacity means it takes into consideration the exact amount of time that you have on your resources. And infinite capacity says, capacity is not my problem. All that you want, I can produce. Now, if the load is way less than 50% of the installed capacity, one can assume that it's an infinite capacity. However, even in infinite capacities, we will have certain hiccups. But in finite capacity, we actually say that my capacities are finite and they get booked systematically as I load the machine. The essential difference: in an infinite capacity environment, there is a lead time of manufacturing calculated by the system, and this lead time of manufacturing is offsetted from the date of delivery, and this brings out the materials requirement date. The assumption is that the lead time of manufacturing remains constant. When I say remains constant, that means that irrespective of the quantity that the customer has ordered, the lead time remains constant. You can still dilute it and say, okay, my lead time is calculated depending on the size of the order. Yes, one can do that. But still it remains an infinite capacity planning as long as you say that I have enough capacity available. For example, you can say that I require for a very large order 20 days to manufacture. So from the delivery date you minus 20 days and you say all the material should be available in my factory on that date. Now, if there is a small order of the same component, naturally the total manufacturing time will be less, and you will say please get the material not 20 days but just 5 days because this order is very small. By doing this, just calculating the time to manufacture, you are not actually doing a finite capacity planning, because you have not compared the requirement of hours for manufacturing of this work order against the available capacity of the resources. You are assuming that whatever may be the requirement of the hours, I have capacity. This is the major difference between infinite and finite. Infinite capacity is the source or the core on which materials requirement planning is based. So the MRP has a tendency to bring in too much of material earlier, and hence its ability to influence reduction of inventory is not very good. On the other side, the finite capacity assumes that I have limited capacity on my resources, and then it starts putting in the start date and stop date of every operation and tells you when will that order get finished. So you might have given a 20-day promise, but because of the rate of manufacturing of a certain slow resource, it is going to take you 40 days to make it. Now, if it is going to be 40 days, why are you getting the material in 20 days? And if you promise to deliver it on the due date, that means you need to get the material in earlier. In other sense, you can then decide, depending on your weekly consumption or daily consumption, when to get the material. That means you scatter the delivery. Finite capacity allows you that privilege because you know exactly when the material is required. And you know the daily consumption. So you know I can get in 5 days of daily consumption in. So finite capacity can give you much lower inventory than infinite capacity. This is number one.